Lord Alistair Blackwood was not a man given to sentiment, yet he kept a piece of frayed, water-stained lace, the last relic of his mother, as an almost sacred object. It was his only testament to the past, and it served as the relentless fuel for his future. Today, that future had arrived. Alistair, cold as the marble hearth before which he stood, held the bill of sale that made him the new owner of Ashworth Manor, a property he neither needed nor desired. He had bought the house for one reason: to employ the last remaining daughter of the Hayes family, Miss Eleanor Hayes. He saw her name on the governess's contract reduced to a common employee, and a grim satisfaction settled over him. His intention was to watch her suffer the refined indignity of servitude, a subtle, constant torture he would personally oversee. He would use her quiet distress as the perfect leverage, a living monument to her family's downfall. Alistair was about to meet the enemy he had spent a decade planning to crush. Yet he had no way of knowing he was about to sign a contract not for a governess, but for the one woman who would demand his very soul as payment for his years of hatred.
Part 1. The Indictment. The air in the library of Blackwood Hall was as cold and sharp as the man who occupied it. Lord Alistair Blackwood was not merely wealthy, he was an embodiment of the aristocracy's most formidable power. A power forged in a bitter past and honed by the relentless pursuit of one singular goal: retribution. At 36, his face bore the stern, uncompromising lines of a man who had seen too much and forgiven nothing. His fortune, vast and newly consolidated, was less a comfort than a weapon, and tonight he was about to aim it. Alistair stood before the roaring fireplace, but the heat could not touch the glacial core of his purpose. He held a letter, its paper thin and inconsequential, yet its contents were the culmination of years of calculated silence. It detailed the reduced, pitiable circumstances of the Hayes family, the very lineage he held responsible for the tragedy that had shattered his own youth. "Penniless," he muttered, the word a sneer of grim satisfaction. "Ruined, and justly so." He remembered the name Hayes not with the faded fondness of memory, but with the visceral shock of betrayal and loss. They had been the glittering center of a world that was snatched from him, and for that transgression they would pay a debt he had been accruing interest on for 15 years. His solicitor, Mr. Finch, a nervous, precise man, cleared his throat from the leather armchair opposite. "My lord, the elder Mr. Hayes remains confined to his estates in Surrey. However, his daughter, Miss Eleanor Hayes, has been obliged to seek employment, a governess, no less. She is currently situated at Ashworth Manor, in Kent, in the employ of the Gilchrist family." Alistair's eyes, the color of cold slate, narrowed. A governess! The daughter of the man who had once treated him with the condescension of the established peerage, now reduced to teaching deportment and mathematics to the children of a minor gentry family. It was a delicious, if fleeting, irony. "Eleanor Hayes," Alistair repeated, tasting the name. He had not considered the daughter. His vengeance had always been aimed at the patriarch. But the thought of her, a fragile piece of the detested puzzle, suddenly offered a new, more profound avenue of pain. Ruining the father through financial devastation was one thing; forcing the daughter to endure a slow, public, and personal humiliation was quite another. He turned to Mr. Finch, his expression hardening into a predatory mask. "Ashworth Manor, you say? A sizable estate, I recall. Is it profitable?"
Moderately so, my lord, but the Gilchrists are in some financial straits. It is widely known they are looking to sell to settle debts. A faint, chilling smile touched Alistair's lips, the smile of a predator sensing its prey. Then the matter is settled, Finch. I shall buy Ashworth Manor. I will offer the Gilchrists a sum they cannot refuse, provided the transfer of ownership is executed with immediate effect. They may keep their children, but their governess shall become mine. Finch blinked, his spectacles slightly slipping down his nose. My lord, surely your own estate is sufficient for your needs. This seems extreme. It is precisely the measure of extremity required, Alistair stated, his voice resonating with cold authority. Do not question my intent, Finch. Merely execute my command. I require Miss Hayes to remain in her post until I arrive to assume residence. The transaction is to be a surprise to all involved, most especially to the governess herself.
He watched his solicitor scurry out, leaving him alone with the oppressive silence of the library. Alistair lifted his glass of port, its ruby color reflecting the firelight, but found no warmth in it. His plan was clear. He would use Eleanor Hayes as leverage. He would force her to suffer the daily grind of working for the man sworn to ruin her family, a constant, living reminder of their downfall. Every task, every polite interaction would be a refined torture directed not at her personally, but at the lineage she represented. He would watch her break, and in her quiet distress he would finally find the justice that had been denied to him for so long. The subsequent week saw the swift, impersonal efficiency of a great fortune at work. Papers were signed, coins transferred, and the Gilchrists, relieved of their debt and now comfortably funded, departed Ashworth Manor with a haste that spoke of sudden good fortune. Eleanor Hayes, wholly unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, remained. Eleanor was 22, slender of build and possessed of a quiet grace that was wholly at odds with the frantic energy of her younger charges. She had been raised in the expectation of a life of ease and consequence, a daughter of the landed gentry, and the fall from grace had been a profound shock. Yet, unlike her parents, who retreated into a fog of bitter nostalgia, Eleanor had faced the new reality with a resolute dignity. She had secured the post at Ashworth, determined to contribute and to salvage some shred of self-respect for her family. She was in the midst of a dreary afternoon lesson on the geography of the Iberian Peninsula when the news arrived. Mrs. Gilchrist, tearful and strangely ecstatic, burst into the schoolroom. Miss Hayes, my dear, I have wonderful, utterly unbelievable news. We are leaving this very afternoon. The children are to pack their things. A Lord Blackwood, you may have heard the name, of course, has purchased Ashworth. The sale was finalized this morning. Eleanor stood, a map of Spain dangling from her fingers. Purchased the manor, ma'am? But what does that mean for my position? Mrs. Gilchrist wrung her hands. Well, that is the peculiar part. Lord Blackwood, he is a very imposing, very particular man, I understand, expressly requested that you remain. Said he would require a governess for his own future needs, though he has no children of his own that we know of. It is all rather irregular, but such men are never regular, are they? He will arrive in a few days. You are to remain, Miss Hayes. You are now the employee of Lord Alistair Blackwood. The name struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, though she could not immediately place the origin of the dread it instilled. It was a name spoken in the hush of her father's library, often accompanied by a strained, guilty silence. A ghost from the past she did not understand. 3 days later, the sound of carriage wheels crunching on the gravel drive heralded his arrival. Eleanor stood by the nursery window, hands clasped, watching as a man of formidable stature alighted from a sleek, dark carriage. He was dressed in impeccable broadcloth, severe and unadorned, a striking contrast to the lush green of the Kent countryside. He did not look like the benevolent gentleman who might purchase a stately home. He looked like a general surveying a conquered territory. When the butler summoned her to the drawing-room, she found him standing by the mantelpiece, his back to her, radiating an aura of cold, contained power. She curtsied low, her heart beating a desperate tattoo against her ribs. "My Lord Blackwood," she murmured, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands.
Alistair turned slowly. His gaze swept over her, taking in the modest gray gown, the simple lace cap, the fine, yet entirely unadorned, features. Her eyes, a startling shade of deep blue, were wide with trepidation, yet met his with an unwavering, quiet dignity he found irritatingly unexpected. She carried herself not as a servant, but as a lady forced by circumstance. He saw the daughter of Hayes, the family he loathed, but he also saw a young woman whose vulnerability was starkly apparent. The internal conflict was a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He had expected to feel pure, satisfying hatred. Instead, he felt only a heightened, dangerous sense of control. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged, his voice a low, resonant baritone that held no warmth whatsoever. "You are the governess. You will remain in my employ." He paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy and oppressive. Eleanor stood perfectly still, waiting. "Let us understand one another immediately, Miss Hayes," he continued, taking a step toward her. "I did not acquire this property for the sake of its fine gardens or its architecture. I acquired it for the sake of its staff, of which you are now a key member. I demand impeccable service, silence, and absolute obedience. Your hours will be longer, your duties more exacting, and your proximity to me will be a constant. I intend to take a close, personal interest in every aspect of this household." His eyes held hers, a deliberate, cruel challenge. "Your lineage is not unknown to me, Miss Hayes, and let it be known that I take no pleasure in employing a member of your family, though I take great satisfaction in their ruin. Consider this position a constant reminder of that fact. You are here, in my household, because I placed you here. Do you understand your position?" Eleanor felt the implication like a lash. He knew who she was, and her employment was no benevolent accident. It was a premeditated act of cruelty. Yet a spark of the Hayes' old pride, the very thing he wished to crush, flared within her. She straightened her spine, her expression unreadable. "I understand perfectly, my lord. I am your governess. My position is one of service, and you may expect no less than the utmost dedication to my duties. If you will excuse me, the schoolroom awaits." She curtsied again, the movement sharp and precise, refusing to show the fear that threatened to swallow her whole. As she turned and walked from the room, Alistair watched her, his cold satisfaction warring with a new unsettling emotion. He had expected her to weep, to beg, or to resign. He had not expected such a quiet, stubborn defiance. The game, he realized with a stir of dark excitement, had just become far more interesting. His revenge would be personal, precise, and now, he knew, a far longer and more arduous siege than he had initially planned. He had bought a governess to ruin a family, but he had, perhaps, acquired a much more formidable enemy than he anticipated. Part 2. Unmasking the Man. Life at Ashworth Manor under the proprietorship of Lord Alistair Blackwood quickly settled into a state of oppressive, strained vigilance. The manor itself remained beautiful, but the atmosphere was choked with the chill of Alistair's unrelenting control. His demands were not tyrannical, but they were precise, constant, and designed, Eleanor felt certain, to test the very limits of her composure. The governess's days were a relentless schedule of lessons, supervision, and, most taxing of all, unavoidable proximity to her employer. Alistair made a point of overseeing the children's routine with a rigorous attention he claimed was born of a desire for perfect order, but which Eleanor knew was simply a method of surveillance. He would appear in the schoolroom unannounced, observing her lessons on the proper use of the semicolon or the distinctions of the Roman Empire, his silhouette framed in the doorway, radiating a silent, judgmental authority. Eleanor Hayes, however, refused to be a compliant victim. The disgrace of her family's ruin had stripped her of comfort, but not of her integrity. She was fiercely protective of her young charge, 8-year-old Miss Harriet Gilchrist, who had been left behind for the remainder of the quarter. Eleanor poured her entire principled nature into her duties, creating a fortress of quiet professionalism around herself. If Alistair questioned the syllabus, she responded with the concise, reasoned defense of a scholar. If he critiqued her management of Harriet's unruly temperament, she met his icy stare with a gaze that, though deferential, was utterly unwavering. She would not bow, she would not weep, she would only perform her role with an exactitude that left him no room for complaint. One damp November morning, Alistair found Eleanor in the rose garden, bundled against the mist, reading aloud to Harriet. The passage was from a worn copy of Sense and Sensibility, and Eleanor's voice, low and expressive, carried the emotional weight of Eleanor Dashwood's quiet despair. "The tragedy of a woman forced to endure hardship with silent dignity," Alistair observed, his voice cutting through the melancholy passage like a shard of ice. He had approached silently on the wet grass. Eleanor closed the book, placing a steadying hand on Harriet's shoulder. "Good day, my lord. We were reviewing literature. A pointless pursuit, I find. Sentimentality is the opiate of the financially irresponsible. Your father, Miss Hayes, was exceedingly sentimental." The barb was sharp, intended to wound. Eleanor felt a surge of hot indignation, but quelled it instantly, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. "My lord," she said, her voice clear and measured, "sentimentality and compassion are not the same. If my duty is to prepare Miss Gilchrist for life, I must instruct her that fortitude is admirable, but kindness is essential. I refuse to teach her that the world is governed only by cold, calculated self-interest." Alistair stared at her. He had expected her to defend her father with tears, or to shrink beneath his cold judgment. Instead, she had delivered a quiet indictment of his own philosophy. Her defense was not of her family's past, but of her own moral present. She saw the fire in her blue eyes, not hatred, but a stubborn, principled disdain for his cynicism. He had spent weeks trying to dissect her, to find the flaws inherent in the daughter of his enemy. He had anticipated vanity, weakness, or greed. Instead, he encountered only quiet strength and a natural, unassuming grace that disarmed his prejudice. She treated the servants with genuine respect, managed the household accounts he forced upon her with meticulous efficiency, and possessed a patient, enduring nature that softened the hardest edges of the manner. Alistair found himself watching her, not merely observing for flaws, but studying her.
He watched the way the morning light caught the coppery strands in her modest brown hair, the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear when deep in thought, and the soft, genuine smile she reserved only for Harriet. The consuming, unwanted desire began subtly, a sudden stillness in his chest when she entered a room, a heightened awareness of her presence that felt like a traitorous warmth in his otherwise cold domain. He wanted to break her silence, to see the passion he sensed beneath the surface. He wanted to push past the controlled governess and glimpse the vulnerable woman. He wanted to possess the principled nature he could not crush. The climax arrived in the late hours of a blustery Friday night. Harriet, frail-chested and prone to the winter ailments, was suddenly gripped by a severe, rattling fever. The manor was thrown into confusion. The local physician was miles away, struggling through a sudden, heavy snowfall that had crippled the roads. The housekeeper wrung her hands and spoke of leeches and prayer. Eleanor, recognizing the dangerous speed of the illness, took immediate, decisive control. She sent for the footman to heat bricks, prepared a steaming herbal infusion, and placed damp cloths on the child's fevered brow. She worked with a focused, fierce intensity, her governess's cap abandoned, her hair escaping its pims, transforming her from a lady into a caregiver driven by primal concern. Alistair, awakened by the commotion, strode into the nursery, expecting panic. He found Eleanor seated beside the bed, holding Harriet's small hand, her face pale but determined. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp with alarm. "She has a high fever, my lord. The physician cannot get through," Eleanor reported, never taking her eyes from the child. "I am managing it with compresses and tea. We must keep her temperature down and wait for the doctor." Alistair watched her work. She was entirely focused, authoritative, yet utterly tender. His mind, trained on business and revenge, could only register her competence. "Your tea," he said curtly. "What is in it?" Eleanor finally looked up, her blue eyes dark with exhaustion and worry. "Sage and willow bark, my lord. Willow bark is for the fever. It is a remedy my grandmother used for all of us. I assure you it will do no harm." He did not trust her family, but he suddenly trusted her. He found himself moving to the fire, stoking it to a fierce blaze, and bringing her hot water without being asked. They spent the night in an intense, wordless partnership. As the fever raged, the icy facade Alistair maintained began to crack. He watched the desperate tenderness with which Eleanor cared for a child who was not her own, and a memory, sharp and agonizing, surfaced. As the first tentative gray light of dawn crept through the nursery window, the child's breathing eased and the fever finally broke. Eleanor slumped back in her chair, tears of relief tracing clean paths through the soot and exhaustion on her face. Alistair, still standing over the fire, turned to her. In the dim, quiet room, the wall between them felt paper-thin. He saw her fragility, the profound emotional cost of the night's vigil. "You saved her, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice stripped bare of its usual chill. It was simply a statement of fact, heavy with weight he could not yet articulate. Eleanor shook her head wearily. "We kept the worst at bay, my lord. That is all." He walked to the window, staring out at the white, silent world. He did not know why he spoke, only that her unwavering, kind presence had broken the dam of his long-held silence. "My mother," he began, the words thick and difficult. "She fell ill when I was 10, a fever, much like this. The Hayes family, your father, they were my father's closest friends.
They were to come and help us, they promised. They never came. They departed for London claiming sudden business. My father could not leave her side to fetch the physician. She died alone, save for him and me. He turned back to her, the confession delivered in a voice that trembled only slightly, yet felt like a seismic shift in the manor's foundation. He looked not like the formidable Lord Blackwood, but a boy still grieving the injustice. The ruin I sought to inflict on your family was not merely for financial betrayal. It was for the cowardice and abandonment that stole my mother from me. They claimed friendship and offered nothing but hollow excuses. They left us to suffer. He finished, his eyes burning with the old, terrible pain. Eleanor listened, her own weariness forgotten. The truth, raw and grievous, hung between them. It was a wound, not a calculation. It explained the profound, venomous hatred she had felt aimed at her family. She rose and walked toward him slowly, not as a governess approaching her master, but as one human being approaching another in pain. The action was instinctive, a simple extension of the kindness she lived by. "My lord," she said softly, "I did not know. I cannot speak for my father's actions, only that I am truly sorry for the loss that built this terrible wall between us." Her apology, offered not out of fear but genuine empathy, was the final blow to his carefully constructed fortress of vengeance. He had expected her to recoil from his confession, but instead she offered succor. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the wall crumbled. His desire, which had been a slow, simmering awareness, became a consuming, desperate fire. She was the daughter of his enemy, the symbol of his deepest tragedy, but she was also the most principled, courageous, and real woman he had ever encountered. He reached out, his hand closing around her wrist, a gesture born of need, not dominance. His thumb brushed the delicate pulse point on her skin. "Eleanor," he whispered, her name a foreign, desperate sound on his lips. His slate eyes, usually so cold, were dark with a mixture of confusion and intense longing. "Eleanor, do you not see what you are doing to me? I bought you to make you suffer. I bought you to use you as a weapon." His voice was a ragged confession, and before either of them could pull back from the precipice, he closed the distance, his other hand sweeping into her unbound hair. He kissed her, not with the practiced ease of a lord, but with the searing, urgent intensity of a man finally reaching for the truth he has denied himself for years. It was a kiss born of hatred, redeemed by desire, and utterly, profoundly unwanted by his years-long quest for vengeance. The taste of mint tea and winter air mingled with the sharp, shocking taste of forbidden, undeniable truth. The kiss broke as abruptly as it began, leaving both of them breathless and utterly undone. The dawn had arrived, and with it the terrifying reality of their situation. The aftermath of the kiss in the dim nursery was a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all the sounds of the waking house. Alistair withdrew first, his body rigid with shock and self-reproach. The intensity of his reaction, the raw, desperate hunger for a woman he was sworn to hate, was a profound betrayal of his 15-year-long devotion to vengeance. Eleanor, her face flushed and her breath catching, backed away, clutching her shawl around her. The kiss was not the gentle introduction to affection she had once dreamed of. It was a devastating conflagration that threatened to burn down the entire carefully constructed edifice of her composure. "My lord," she whispered, her voice barely steady, I must return to my duties." "No," Alistair commanded, the word low and guttural. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure shattered. "We must speak. Immediately. In the library. In the cold, imposing library, the scene was set for the painful reckoning. Alistair paced before the fireplace, a whirlwind of inner turmoil. His purpose, his very identity, had been defined by the ruin of the Hayes family. Now that purpose was inextricably tangled with the woman he had just kissed with a profound and frightening need. Do you understand the gravity of this situation, Miss Hayes? You are the daughter of the man responsible for the single greatest wound of my life. I purchased this house for the express purpose of making your life a misery, a living reprisal against your lineage. And yet, he broke off, unable to articulate the depth of the contradiction. The irony was a cruel cutting blade. His revenge had led him to the only person who possessed the integrity and kindness necessary to thaw his frozen heart. And yet, my lord, Eleanor finished softly, standing taller than her slender frame suggested, you have found that the daughter is not the father, and I have found that the man who harbors so much hate also possesses a grief that is truly profound. She pressed her hands together, determined to speak the truth. The class difference hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I am a governess, my lord. I have no dowry, no property, and my family name is synonymous with ruin and debt. You are Lord Alistair Blackwood, a man of power and consequence, whose life is governed by a long-held duty. I am your employee, and nothing more can possibly come of this, no matter what transpired this morning. I will continue my duties with the appropriate decorum, and I shall forget the incident. Her pragmatism, her willingness to bury the moment for the sake of survival, stung him more than any dramatic protest. He saw the barrier she was erecting, composed not of pride, but of devastating reality. You believe I would simply let this pass? He scoffed, walking towards her, his eyes intense. Eleanor, do not insult my intelligence. You felt it. That was not a trivial moment. It was forbidden, my lord, and what is forbidden should be dismissed. My hatred, Coupon, that is what should be dismissed. I have pursued a ghost for 15 years. I have defined my present by a trauma of the past. But you showed me more kindness in a single night than I have received in a decade. You are the fire and the truth I never knew I was missing. He felt the weight of the impossible choice settle upon him, crushing the years of careful, cold planning. He had to choose his prideful duty to the past, which demanded the complete and utter suffering of the Hayes family, or the possibility of a shared future with the woman who had brought light back into his desolate world. For the next week, the manor was fraught with unspoken tension. Alistair was silent, withdrawn, and terrifyingly efficient. He spent hours closeted with his solicitor, not to discuss Eleanor, but to discuss the fate of her family's remaining small estates and properties, the final nails he intended to drive into the Hayes coffin. Eleanor, sensing a reckoning was near, prepared for the inevitable. She began to pack her few belongings, anticipating his decision to dismiss her in order to save himself from his own treacherous heart. She would rather leave with her dignity intact than remain as a constant temptation and reminder of his failure to complete his revenge. The climax arrived not in a passionate declaration, but in the cold, public formality of an evening gathering Alistair was obliged to host for his associates, the very men who had helped him orchestrate the ruin of her family. Eleanor was instructed to wait in the parlor, managing a final domestic arrangement. She overheard the voices drifting from the dining room, sharp and clearly audible. "A toast to Lord Blackwood," boomed the voice of Sir Charles Denholm, Alistair's primary legal strategist in the Hayes downfall. "The final settlements are complete, my lord. The remaining Hayes property is now legally yours, clearing the last vestige of the name from the county's rolls. A victory hard won." Revenge is sweet, eh, Blackwood? A long, agonizing silence followed. Eleanor stood rigid, her breath held captive. This was it, the final, definitive act of his vengeance. He would accept the toast, confirming his decades-long commitment to the destruction of her family. Alistair's voice, when it finally came, was deep, steady, and utterly shocking.
"No, Dunholm," he stated, the formality of the setting lending gravity to his every syllable. "There will be no toast to victory, and no mention of revenge. In fact, there is a correction to be made." The murmur of the guests ceased entirely. "I have spent the better part of my life believing the Hayes family was responsible for my mother's death through their gross negligence," Alistair continued. "I have allowed that belief to fuel a campaign of legal and financial attrition, which I now recognize was driven by profound personal bias, not objective justice." He paused, and Eleanor could feel the shock radiating from the room. "I have, in the past days, revisited the documents and the true timeline of that tragedy. The facts are these. The Hayes family were delayed by an accident they could not control, and their delay, though regrettable, did not alter the outcome of my mother's illness. My anger was misplaced, and my actions, however emotionally justified, were in truth a punitive personal malice. I regret that malice." Alistair took a deep breath. He was actively sacrificing his revenge plot, and more than that, admitting fault at immense personal and social cost to his reputation as a formidable, unforgiving peer. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice ringing with determined finality, "I have directed my solicitor to halt the acquisition of the final Hayes assets and to ensure that a viable settlement is established, clearing their name of the worst of the remaining legal slander. Their ruin was my doing, and their restoration shall, in part, be as well." The stunned silence was broken by the scraping of chairs. Alistair had not just chosen Eleanor, he had chosen a new, redeemed identity. An hour later, Alistair found Eleanor exactly where he had left her, standing pale and overwhelmed in the parlor. "You heard," he stated, his eyes searching hers, not for gratitude, but for understanding. "I heard, my lord," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You sacrificed everything, your pride, your purpose, your reputation among your peers, all for a truth you only just uncovered." "No," he corrected, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "I sacrificed my hatred, Eleanor. It was a meager, cold offering compared to the life you offer. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I have earned the right to try for it." He stood before her, no longer the cold, powerful aristocrat, but a man laid bare by love and redemption. "I am a better man with you. You have taught me that love is stronger than hatred. I will never again be the man sworn to your family's ruin. Will you, Eleanor Hayes, allow me the immense honor of giving me your name? I offer you not comfort, which you need not, but my devotion and my unwavering respect, and a life defined by quiet, enduring love." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw not the slate-cold anger of the past, but the deep, passionate vulnerability she had glimpsed in the nursery. He had been willing to destroy his own identity to save hers. It was an act of profound, utterly redeemed love. A slow, tremulous smile touched her lips. "I do not need wealth, Alistair. I only need truth, and you have given me more truth than I dared to hope for." She placed her hands in his, accepting the promise of a difficult but genuine future. They married quietly weeks later. Though they faced public disapproval, The gossip was furious, fueled by Alistair's abrupt betrayal of his associates. They built a life defined by quiet devotion at Ashworth. Alistair found his greatest joy not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the simple dignity of a shared life, while Eleanor found in him a fierce protector and a husband who had exchanged the cold armor of revenge for the profound warmth of truth. The story was not one of fairy tale ease, but of fire, truth, and the redemption of a formidable heart.